So we are met tonight not only to remember the Yaran, the 7 prisoners who were arrested in Iran without due cause, but also we meet to pay homage to all those around the world who are persecuted, tortured, maligned, and imprisoned because they refuse to submit their moral and spiritual convictions to the tyranny of violence, ideology, greed, or corruption. Lastly, we are here in gratitude and in a spirit of solidarity with the many men and women across the world who work for a brighter future for all humankind. At this moment, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Wonderful, wonderful Sarah Lee Whitson, the director of the Middle East and North African Division of the Human Rights Watch. Sarah Lee Whitson has led landmark investigations of human rights conditions in Libya and in Saudi Arabia, and numerous advocacy missions in the region, and overseen over 20 research missions and edited the resulting reports. She has published articles in the Middle East, in international and regional publications, and prior to her work with the Human Rights Watch, she conducted several human rights missions in region, including such places as the Iraqi civilian population, the elections in the Kurdish-controlled northern Iraq, and human rights issues in southern Lebanon. Before joining the Human Rights Watch, Whitson worked as an attorney here in New York City for Goldman Sachs and Company. She has graduated from the University of California at Berkeley and from the Harvard Law School. Let us give a warm welcome to Sarah Lee Whitson.
Good evening. I can't see my friends out there, but I know they're out there, and I'm so happy to see them and see you tonight. I've been asked to comment on the human rights situation in Iran and our main areas of concern in the country, which I'll try to do in, unfortunately, very summary fashion. It comes as no surprise to anyone, least of all this audience, who no doubt have a close ear to the Baha'i community in Iran, that the situation in the country, in terms of violations of human rights by the Iranian government, has gone from bad to worse. In my 6 years at Human Rights Watch, and certainly in the nearly 2 decades Human Rights Watch is focused on Iran, this past year has been the darkest. The government has launched its widest ever crackdown against virtually all elements of civil society in the country, particularly any Iranian perceived to be a government critic. At the same time, the tremendous optimism, hope, and bravery of the Iranian people have perhaps never shined brighter. It is the courage of the Iranian people who continue to resist every effort of their government to silence them, stifle them, jail them, and execute them that continues to give us, to give me, hope, particularly during this Nowruz holiday, for which I express my best wishes. The recent period of upheaval related to the disputed elections, with over 1 million demonstrators, met with thousands of arrests, 37 deaths of demonstrators, and hundreds who remain in detention with no information about their whereabouts, no access to their family or lawyers, and no charges against them. This has been the government's response to the mass, overwhelmingly peaceful protests of the Iranian people to review the results of the election. And it comes on the heels of what has been a 5-year crackdown against a wide range of Iranian civil society. Women's rights activists seeking reform of discriminatory laws, labor groups and unions, students, journalists, scholars, political opposition, lawyers, activists for minority rights, Kurds, Baluch, Arabs. Iran has a sophisticated, educated, diverse civil society, after Israel, perhaps the most organized and articulate in the entire Middle East, who have resiliently insisted on reform and change in the country, and for that have faced relentless persecution. The Baha'i community has, of course, long faced such persecution, targeted for the face of its people. While Baha'is are not the largest religious minority in Iran, they have the misfortune of being the most poorly treated, facing over 100 years of discrimination and oppression. Denial of recognition as a religious community in the Constitution has made it easier for the government to target Baha'is and their social and cultural institutions with impunity, and to deny them the right to practice their faith openly. Since the founding of the Islamic Republic 31 years ago, hundreds of Baha'is have been arbitrarily arrested, detained, or even executed by the state. The revolutionary committees and revolutionary guards have systematically targeted the leadership of the Baha'i community, arresting and executing national and local religious leaders in major cities throughout the country. As was just mentioned, 7 Baha'i leaders continue to face an ongoing secret trial of charges for spying on Israel, a typical charge Baha'i community members face. The government has destroyed Baha'i houses of worship, cultural centers, community property, and desecrated Baha'i graves. Perhaps the most notorious case was the 1979 confiscation and demolition of the House of Bab in Shiraz. Discrimination against the Baha'is is the official policy of the state. For example, the government refuses to admit and continues to expel Baha'i students who make their religion known, leading to the mass exclusion of Baha'is from higher education. Baha'i community efforts to establish their own schools have led to charges against leaders for propaganda against the state. What gives the government the procedural cover to get away with all this are laws and regulations that allow it to arrest, detain, and prosecute just about anyone it wants on a completely arbitrary basis. Despite vague protections in the Constitution for free speech and association, the so-called security law provisions of the Penal Code prohibit free speech and association, which are deemed to be against domestic and international security or the Islamic Republic, or insulting to Islam or Iran's supreme leader, without any definition of what those terms actually mean. One can even be charged under the law for enmity with God, subject to death, though there are no defined elements of this crime. Similarly, it is these security laws that allow for unlimited detention without charge. As long as a judge renews so-called temporary detention orders, you can be detained forever. There are laws that prohibit access to counsel at a judge's discretion in any case that's deemed to involve national security. While there are laws on the books that ban torture and forced confessions, we know that the security forces breach these laws with impunity as well, and we have scores of cases documenting this. The dire human rights situation has been compounded by a complete information lockdown in the country. Foreign news organizations are severely restricted. The local press, the local independent press, has faced a complete shutdown. There is widespread internet censorship. The arena for getting information into and out of the country has drastically shrunk and grows smaller by the day. Lawyers and human rights organizations are being closely monitored, with scores arrested, the rest under close surveillance. Just last week, the government arrested 30 members of 3 of the most prominent local human rights organizations and shut down their websites, accusing them of being involved in a CIA project to destabilize the country with cyber warfare. Serious surveillance, not just of websites, but of email, telephone, and mobile communications outside the country, is completely, almost thorough. Accusing people of being involved in a CIA project again. People are increasingly afraid to communicate with us, and Human Rights Watch, as well as Yale University, are on an official list of enemies with whom contact is barred. The government has used its political conflict with the United States and Israel to justify this all-out campaign against independent voices. Anyone who questions the government is a spy for the CIA working to overthrow the government in a US-funded Velvet Revolution. The bombastic rhetoric of American lawmakers in this regard, with talk about overthrowing the Iranian government, is extremely unhelpful. Especially unhelpful are provisions for US aid to Iranian civil society and opposition groups, which are funded but unspent because no Iranian group would take this money. But nevertheless, the existence of these provisions is all the justification the Iranian government needs to fuel its fire against critics. It fuels the paranoia and insecurity felt by the government. Ultimately, we can and must support and speak out for the citizens of Iran, but direct meddling will undermine the efforts of Iranians to reform their society. There are no easy answers, I must admit, to what will work to curbing the abuses of the Iranian government. But at minimum, we here on the outside must do no harm. I'm afraid that this is a battle that the Iranian people must win. but I have no doubt that they will prevail. Thank you.